Hello, welcome to downtown New Orleans virtually. I'm Libby with Lucky Bean Tours, and we're going to explore New Orleans today, focusing specifically on the stories around jazz, and we'll branch off into some famous murders and some mafia stories here in New Orleans because we're going to see that they all kind of come together. The mural is a very colorful, extreme close-up of the face of Louis Armstrong. The artist, Eduardo Cobra, was asked to do a mural because they liked his colorful style, but he decided to do it of Louis Armstrong. This mural is one of Buddy Bolden and his band. Buddy is the one with the halo around him. He's generally agreed to be the father of jazz music, the originator of that bold, brassy, loud Dixieland sound that comes out of New Orleans. Jazz music has its roots all the way back in Africa, but it really sort of took shape in a red light district called Storyville at the very beginning of the 20th century. The mural is based on the only known photograph of Buddy Bolden and his band, and the artist is Brandon B. Mike Odoms, who is a very popular muralist here in New Orleans with works all over the city. Jazz music became a distinct musical genre in the brothels of a red light district called Storyville, which was shut down in 1917. So we don't have a red light district anymore that I know of. But after that, they knocked down almost every single building from Storyville and built a housing project. And the housing project has since been demolished, and a new housing project was built after Hurricane Katrina. But when they were doing the demolition and the rebuilding, they discovered lots of artifacts from the Storyville era. And the panels behind me give all the information about the artifacts, and I'm pretty sure the building behind me is going to become a museum. Some of the artifacts they found were a ginger beer bottle, a porcelain jar, a pipe, a toothbrush, a pitcher, and a pickle jar. They also found an accordion button, gambling dice, massage oil, a rouge pot. I am at the entrance to Armstrong Park in New Orleans, and it is named after Louis Armstrong, probably the most famous person from New Orleans of all time, and definitely the most famous jazz musician. Within Armstrong Park is the Roots of Music Cultural Garden. There are lots of sculptures and murals and monuments that pay tribute to our vast musical heritage. This group of sculptures right here depicts a second line, and that's a musical procession that we have in New Orleans for just about any occasion. Weddings, funerals, saints make it to the Super Bowl, you name it, we've got a second line for it. This sculpture, which is sort of like a mural, is of Congo Square because it was right here where the enslaved Africans used to gather on Sundays and dance and keep a lot of their musical heritage alive. This is a sculpture of Tootie Montana, who was one of the chiefs of the Mardi Gras Indian tribes. This is a sculpture of Buddy Bolden, the original jazz player. A bust of Sidney Bechet, New Orleans born and raised, the lovely, talented Mahalia Jackson. And, of course, the man himself, Satchmo, Louis Armstrong. I am now in front of the Piazza d'Italia, or the Italian Plaza, that's right in the middle of the downtown business district of New Orleans, and is an homage or a tribute to all the thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of Sicilian people, Italian people, but mostly Sicilian people that came here to New Orleans beginning in the early 1800s all the way up until the early 1900s. And they definitely contributed to our food culture and parades and festivals, but also a lot to jazz music. The most famous example, of course, is Louis Prima, who was from New Orleans, but also Nick LaRocca and his original Dixieland Jazz Band recorded the very first jazz album in 1917. That was Livery Stable Blues. Okay, I'm on St. Peter Street in the French Quarter. It's getting a little bit crazy down here. Behind me is Preservation Hall. This is a real, true New Orleans Dixieland Jazz Hall. There is no food, there are no drinks, there's no restroom, and there's no other type of music. By the 1950s, a couple, the Jaffes, realized they were operating an art gallery and performance space out of here, and they began to realize that those really early original jazz musicians from Storyville were dying off, and there was a fear that our unique musical history could be lost. So they dedicated this building 100% to the preservation of good New Orleans jazz, and they're still at it. I am in Cypress Grove Cemetery, and the tomb behind me is the Chinese Society tomb. One of the groups that the Louisiana legislature was bringing in to attempt to replace the enslaved workers in the sugar fields after the Civil War were Chinese men, Cantonese men. They soon discovered that sugar production is horrible, brutal work and moved on to other things, and were ultimately replaced by Sicilian men that came here to work in the sugarcane fields. I am in beautiful Metairie Cemetery, which is one of our many above ground cemeteries here in New Orleans. And I'm walking along a row of society tombs. So these are really, really big tombs that were for immigrant groups, and these particular ones were almost all Italian and Sicilian groups. The Sicilian people began coming here in the early 1800s, but really a huge wave of Sicilian immigration came after the Civil War. Initially, they were a labor force that were going to replace the enslaved people in the sugarcane fields, but eventually they kind of cornered the market on produce vending in the market and other businesses. But oftentimes they clashed with other immigrant groups and then sometimes the police. I am again in Metairie Cemetery, and behind me is the tomb of David Hennessy, who was the chief of police of New Orleans. He was murdered by assassins back in 1890, and it was believed that his assassins were members of an organized crime family. And so the suspects were brought to trial and they were acquitted. So a vigilante mob, the day after the acquittal, broke into the prison, dragged out the suspects, and executed them publicly. This is actually the largest mass lynching in American history. 11 Sicilians who were executed in retaliation for the murder of the chief in 1891 in New Orleans. I am standing in front of the Beauregard House, which is a museum house that you can tour here in the French Quarter. Its two most famous residents were General P.G.T. Beauregard and Francis Marcus Caius, the writer, which is how it gets its name. But in 1907, it was the site of one of the very first Mafia murders in the United States. The Giancana family was operating a wholesale liquor distributorship out of here and also living here. And one night in 1907, they murdered 5 members of the Black Hand, which was an extortionist group that was trying to get protection money from them. Hello from world famous Bourbon Street. Even during the day, it gets a little bit crowded down here and crazy. This is where people come now to get their drinks and their naked ladies like they've been doing in New Orleans for a couple of hundred years. But this building behind me, this yellow one that has a Willie's Chicken Shack, was the site of a notorious murder. The very first American to be wounded in World War I was a local man named Edgar Boulany. He survived the war, but he didn't survive his wife shooting him to death in this apartment in 1931. Now I am in Lafayette Square. So this is a beautiful park in downtown New Orleans where we have festivals and concerts a couple of times a year, but it's also sort of ground zero for investigations and conspiracy theories regarding the New Orleans connection to the assassination of President Kennedy. Because all around Lafayette Square are government buildings and court buildings, the CIA headquarters in the 1960s, the FBI offices, and right behind me was the office of Lee Harvey Oswald up until he left New Orleans at the end of the summer of 1963. Thank you so much for touring with me. Fun and great stories and great music are still alive and well here in New Orleans.